So 6 is actually execute the sampling process. So basically everything you just learned, you actually go and apply it and you run it and you get your sample that you're actually going to field. So that's kind of the process. I think the bigger thing that's more helpful is I do have a case study, and I think that kind of brings some of this to light, and you can better understand kind of some of the thought process in deciding what your sample should be. So I'm going to focus on the process steps 2 through 5. I'm not going to go into objectives because honestly that is a huge discussion in narrowing down objectives. So what I have done is come up with an objective. It's a concept test objective. Identify the Starbucks concept with the largest consumer appeal. So basic concept, that's pretty normal type of objective you see with a concept test. So first we're going to define the target population, and I'm guessing it's probably going to be rep adults age 18 to 65. I probably need to know a little bit more about what the concept test is though to make the final call, because one of the big things is to figure out, do I need category users or can I also include non-category users? So with Starbucks, if it's a coffee, you have to be a coffee drinker to like the concept, then you might want to go with rep adults age 18 to 65 who drink coffee. But a lot of the Starbucks stuff appeals to non-coffee drinkers. I'm not a coffee drinker and I go to Starbucks all the time, so a lot of their concepts are appealing to more than just coffee drinkers. The other thing you want to take into account is the type of concept it is, and there's 4 basic types of concepts. One is a restage, and that's where you're taking an idea that's a product that's already out there and you're basically making some adjustments to it. You're either redoing the product, you're repositioning it, you're doing something that's changing what's already out there. The next one is a line extension, and that's where you're actually adding something to your line. So in Starbucks' case, you might be adding a new flavor of one of their existing products. New to the company is something it's already out there, but it's something this particular company hasn't offered. So Starbucks just recently started offering breakfast sandwiches. Obviously, breakfast sandwiches already exist, but it's new to Starbucks. And then the final one is new to the world. So these are things that it creates a whole new category. P&G was doing a lot of that probably back around 2000. They introduced Febreze, which made up the whole fabric refresher category that didn't exist before. They did Swiffer, which kind of did that whole dusting category and cleaning category. So it is possible to create a whole new category within the whole shopping environment. And why all this is important is, for example, for a restage, you're trying to change your current product, and your hope is that you're going to attract non-users. While you make the non-users happy, you also want to make sure you're not making your users unhappy. So you actually want to make sure you're going to have readable bases of users and non-users to make sure that you're meeting current users' needs or not upsetting them while still gaining some share from non-users. And then if it's a new to the company or new to the world, you want to make sure you're not defining your target too narrowly, or you could be missing somebody and actually decide not to move forward. So definitely a lot to think about as you define your target population for this. It's not as simple as, oh yeah, I know exactly what it is, and you spell it out. Now determining the sampling frame, in this case I'm guessing the Lightspeed My Survey panel will be able to handle this job. Starbucks, pretty high incidence, a concept test generally not too big of a base size, but you would want to think about feasibility. So if it's a longer term project, will my panel have the feasibility long term, or do I need to consider bringing in somebody else from the start? Because you don't want to mix up. You don't want to go, oh, for this study I'm going to use my panel, but then I'm out of people, so I'm going to go over for this other study, the next study use somebody else, because they're not apples to apples, so you could actually be affecting your results. The other thing you want to take into account too is if Starbucks is a new client to us, have they been doing work with someone else, and what source were they using for their sample? Because they may have a huge normative database that they want to compare their results to, and if it's all been based on another panel, you then putting yours in may not get them the right read they need. So if they were using someone else, you may actually want to use that person just to make sure that you're getting data that's comparable. And then the next one is to select the sampling technique, and with our panel we're using quota sampling, which is a non-probability technique. And within that, there's a ton of decisions, and this is actually training I'm working on right now, developing, to talk about differential sampling. Do you set hard quotas in your survey? Differential sampling is where you actually take into account response rate. So I know males respond at a lower rate than females, so I'll actually send out more male sample to start with than female sample. So hopefully then my completes come back looking with the right proportion of males and females. And hard quotas in the survey is where you're actually making sure you're going to get a certain number of people in different groups. So a lot of times it's demographically based. So maybe I want to make sure I'm getting 50-50 male-female split, or that my age distribution is right for my sample. So a lot of things to think about with sampling technique, but our main technique is quota sampling. And then finally, determine your sample size, and really it depends on what you've learned in steps 2, 3, and 4. But then there's also a few other things to keep in mind, because we know this is a concept test, and you want to know, is it an early concept screening or is it a final qualification? So early concept screening usually means, oh, they have a bunch of ideas and they want to try to narrow it down because they don't have resources to develop everything. So that's pretty early. You can use a smaller base size for that. Now, if it's final qualification, that usually means it's like right before they're getting ready to launch and they want to do a volume forecast to figure out what their year 1 volume will be. That requires bigger base size. The other thing to consider is it monadic versus sequential monadic? And by monadic, I mean that each person's only seeing one concept. Sequential monadic means they could see more than one concept. So obviously, if you're letting them see multiple concepts, you don't need as much base size as if you're seeing only one concept. And then the other thing you do want to keep in mind is the whole target group idea, and are you going to get a readable base of whatever target groups you might be interested in, and do you need to increase your overall base or try to get some extra people in a certain group. So that's kind of an example of how you might think about this and what you think about at each step. So, just to summarize, hopefully after today you can talk about what sampling is and why it's important, and then hopefully you understand the sampling design process. And at the end, I do have a bunch of references that I used in some of this, although some of this may be stuff that I cut out of here, but these are all good books and good articles to consider if you're really interested in the whole sampling area and knowing more. So that is all. Any questions?